Few topics are ever as prevalent as urban mobility in everyday life, and yet which receive so little open discussion. We talk about individual issues such as public transportation or traffic and road building or maintenance, but as an overall concern, not nearly enough. Much of this is down to how budgets are organized within city frameworks. Districts get cash based on many different factors. Is it an industrial area or residential? How much money does the area raise by way of rates and taxes? Is the area close to a main road, and does it act as an area that houses blue-collar workers or white-collar workers? Then there are larger concerns such as general mobility policies, lobby groups, the wider economic plan, if there is one. In this episode, I talk with Valeria from Argentina about the topic. Valeria is an urban and mobility planner with an architectural background, experienced across the public and private sectors in Latin America and Europe. Born in Argentina, she has also lived in the Netherlands and currently based in Germany for over 6 years. She has worked on projects related to architecture, integrated urban development, public space, and sustainable mobility. With experience spanning local government, academia, and international cooperation, her work focuses on advancing inclusive, resilient, and environmentally responsible cities. She is particularly passionate about the role of sustainable mobility in creating healthier, more equitable, and people-centered urban environments. Thank you, Valeria, for your time and insight. This is TwoandaMic. Rise up and be curious.
Dong weche pek kod welo mabiro e TwoandaMic. Dong parodit kod jok mawuoye TwoandaMic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji e TwoandaMic. Wala wachokre, wabed piny, bi wawinje ero chako. Moment ndi TwoandaMic podcast makende.
I'm joined by Valeria from Argentina, but in Berlin. Hello, Valeria. How are you?
Hi there. All good. What about you?
Good, thank you. Good. We are both recovering from colds, so if we sound a bit crazy to some people, there may be the odd coughs and so on here and there, then please forgive us. That's the unfortunate situation of the period that we're in at the moment. But yeah, as I said then, so Valeria is from Argentina, and we've tried to do this podcast now for over, I think, a year and a half, wasn't it, that we were introduced all those months ago?
Yes, true. I'm sorry for my part, but yes, I don't know, life is going super fast and we get busy, and yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm glad that finally we're doing it.
Yeah, super. And I mean, I wanted to say that you've been constantly engaged in projects which relate specifically to the topic as well. So it was never as though you had a free moment and then we let the opportunity go by. It was just that you were involved in what we were planning to talk about and didn't have a free moment. So just to introduce the topic then, in general, I've got it in my head as urban mobility. Would you give it a slightly different overall name, or do you think that suits what we'd like to talk about today?
No, I think this name is completely perfect, urban mobility, because actually mobility is a word that has been used for the past. It's kind of more recently, let's say, actually, but because before people used to talk only about transport. And I think transport is one part of the mobility, because actually when we talk about mobility, there are many more factors involved. So it's not only about the means for doing the mobility, let's say transport, mode of transport, but it's also involving people and many such other factors. So I think the word mobility is perfect.
Super, okay. And I mean, your master's focused on, is it Junín, which is a medium-sized city in Argentina? Generally, what's the population of Junín?
Junín is, yes, it's
Junín.
all good. Junín Junín is a medium-sized city in Argentina, and actually it's in Buenos Aires province. As you know, Argentina is a super huge country, and even though Junín is in the same province than Buenos Aires, it's around maybe 250 kilometers from the capital. And around back then, when I was doing the research there, it was around 90,000 inhabitants. And for this size of population in Argentina is considered a medium-sized city. But I have to say that here in Germany, sometimes, the size is not always, the name that is given to the cities is not always the same, the classification. In some other countries can change. And also because there are many research about cities and sizes, is not only about the population, but can be also how many square meters, how important is the city for the region. So there are many other factors that are considered when you tag a city such as medium, small, or big city. Yeah, but
Sure.
in this case, Junín is a medium-sized city, and for sure much smaller than Berlin, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. And so obviously when it comes to talking about urban mobility, then the size of a city will naturally have an influence on the kind of mobility, the quality of mobility, I suppose, that they have in place.
Yes, exactly. From my perspective, if we are talking about the case of Argentina, it's super important because, for example, many cities in Argentina, cities that, for example, with more than 60,000 inhabitants, let's say in the range of medium-sized cities, most of them have public transport, but many others don't have. And then cities with less than 20,000, they don't have any public transport at all. It's a kind of mix of strategies. It is important because also, for example, in the case of, if we are talking about the case of Junín, it had a public transport system. Let's say when I say in this case it's public transport, but it was only a bus service in the past. And it's the example of also many medium-sized cities in Argentina, that what happened is that they just decided to put this service, but they didn't really plan the ways where the bus was going to get around, how many stop frequencies, and all these things at the end made that the system was not really working. So then, and also maybe because of there was not, there was also not, they were not doing, awareness campaign, they were not giving information to people. So some people, they didn't even know that they exist. So even I remember as a kid, because also I'm from a small city, not medium, but a small, like 50,000 inhabitants, also Buenos Aires province. And nowadays there is not any public transport, but I remember when I was a kid, there was a bus, and I remember taking it with my grandma. And actually, my grandma really got lost because we didn't know where we had to leave the bus because it was kind of super unclear. And also was taking ages from going from A to B, was going the whole way around the city. And because it was the only line. So what I mean is, in this case, at the end of the day, then the system is not going to work because people is not going to use it because they are seeing, okay, it's not convenient, it takes so much time, it's not clear. So in this case, so it's not only just having the system, it's also about making sure that people is going to use it, just giving information, just make it everything to really makes it happen.
Sure. So, when we talk about a city, a medium-sized city, let's say that doesn't have a public transport system,
Mm-hmm.
but it still has urban mobility, is what you're kind of saying from before. So mobility isn't necessarily connected to a specific infrastructure. Mobility is simply a question of how people would move around the city.
Exactly. Maybe we're going to so many details and we're not going to the basics because maybe people don't really know what is mobility. But yes, of course, people, mobility is a right. People, it's a need. So you have to move in the city. You have to navigate the city to go to work, to do groceries, to take your kids to school, to many other situations. And what happened in these cases, when I'm talking about these small or medium-sized cities that they have or they don't have public transport, what happened is people start to really look for other solutions. Like, let's say, let's have now bring the topic of the car. So that's what happened. So people start to use it much more, the car, and create a kind of dependency on the car, because for many reasons. Why? It can be because they don't have a public transport, because with the excuse of having kids and, I don't know, having to do many other things during the day, they think that the car is the best solution. And I can understand that when the government or the city doesn't offer any other solution. So I can understand why people use it, but it's not always this reason. So it's much more difficult to understand people behavior when we talk about mobility choices, and it's not about objective or rational decision. Many other factors are involved when people is deciding to choose one mode of transport over another. So I think this is a super important topic, people behavior, and yes, how to move people around in the city and why they choose to move in this way. Because this is the only way to understand these choices. Is the only way that then governments can create policies to try to kind of, I don't say get rid of cars at all, but trying to make people make more sustainable decisions or move in more sustainable way other than the car. So if you want people to not use the car, so then you have to offer them better solutions. So if you don't offer a good public transport system, or you don't offer a safe and secure bike lanes, people is not going to move in another option than is the car. So that's why this is so difficult for cities in general.
This is especially the case for older cities, right? More modern cities, perhaps they have the kind of as a blank page where people can use to make designs, and I suppose mobility forms an important part of city planning and so on. But cities that have a history of, I don't know, 300, 400, 500, 600 years, and in my mind, I think of some of these old cities, like Paris, for example, where you can, these are mainly built for people to walk around or with a horse. You can't imagine any modern SUVs driving down some of these Parisian, sort of small roads. And so obviously these kinds of older cities are much more limited, are they not, in how they can provide public transport? And I think Rome as well. In Rome, as many times as they have tried to introduce a kind of underground network, it's impossible, because every time they start building something, they come across a new kind of ruin. So history also, and culture, I guess, plays a part, right?
Yes, for sure. For sure, it really plays a part. But also, I mean, each city and each context and each country is completely different story, because even though when in Argentina we have younger cities, let's say, we also have these problems, because actually many of those cities, for example, if I'm talking about medium-sized cities in Argentina, or most of them, all of them, they started to expand without any urban planning, even, and let's not talk about transport planning and mobility planning, because this is something that even to not so long time ago, there was not any transport or mobility department in the government. And when they were, so they were not even working together. So that's why it's not easy. Of course, it's not easy. And of course, you have already a city built, and you have to see how to solve these problems, because of course, starting from scratch, like for example Dubai and all these new cities, could be much easier. But I agree, especially now in Europe, is difficult. But many of those cities, European cities, are trying to get back to what was before, to having more pedestrian areas, having more people-centered cities and not car-centric cities, because I mean, if we go back to when the car appears for the first time, that it was, okay, I think maybe before it was before the First War, but I think more or less was mostly in the 70s that cities started to grow around the car. So, I mean, cities were made for cars and not for people. I'm not made, adapted actually, because many houses, even when you see Amsterdam nowadays, it's crazy, because in the past actually it was like the typical pedestrian European city. Then many houses were demolished and even kind of public square were converted into parking places for the car, to give place to the car. But luckily, after many years, somehow the situation went back again to what was in the past. And I think nowadays is a story for many European cities that are trying to just recover this kind of people-centered city. Because when we're talking about destroying all public spaces just to give space to the car, we are also talking about destroying places of social interaction. So that's, I think, is very important. Because when we talk about trying to reduce the amount of cars in cities, it's not only because, as we know, are really bad for the environment and many other negative consequences, not to talk about health, accidents, many other pollution, as we say, but also the lack of social interaction, the lack of just taking out space that should be for all of us and only assigned for the car. That's, I think, is not really fair, and I think that's why it's an important topic nowadays going on.
I remember when engaging in an online debate with a few people about the topic of cars in particular, I mentioned that I found it strange that so many people consider the car itself to be such an important entity, but they forget the fact that even cars, they only carry people. It's not as though most cars are driven without people in. And so I could never really understand why the mentality exists that cars have certain rights on the road that, for example, cyclists don't have. And one person once responded to me, said, no, roads were built for cars. And I said, well, did you ever try putting that question to the Romans? Because when they were building roads, cars weren't really available. And obviously, I mean, as a slightly cheeky question that I put, and I got no response from that. But I mean, the mentality of car drivers is such that they almost, and it's commonly known, they feel like they own the road. How can you start to argue or try to find a solution with people to say, look, we have to share these services, these roads, with other people within the city? How could you start to break down the prejudices that exist?
I mean, it's a super difficult topic, especially if we are talking about here in Germany, where car industry, car lobby is super huge. But let's start for the point that it's public space, so the streets belong to everyone. And in my case, I don't have a car, and I don't want to have a car, and I want to move freely on the street. And sometimes you get to this situation when you are cycling on the street and there is a car, and then they think that they have the right to just make you just go aside because the street, as you say, belongs to them. And this is not true. And even if there is a cycling lane, I also have the choice if I want to take the street. I mean, for sure, it's safer, but it has happened to me even. Sometimes the cycling lanes are not really well maintained. So, or for example, what happened exactly now in February, I was not in January here, that was the worst month in Berlin, but even in February, it was still the streets were frozen and it was super slippery to cycle on the sidewalks, because most of the cycling lanes are on the sidewalks, and the priority was cleaning up the street for cars and not for pedestrian and cyclists. So in that case, I was choosing to cycle on the street because I was feeling safer. So, and it's completely right for every person to be there because, we are all part of this city. So we have all the rights, being in a car or not in a car, as pedestrian, cyclists, we have the same right, I guess, to use and navigate the city in a way that is more convenient for us.
Yeah, and I've always felt, I mean, I've been a car user, car driver, but mainly that was when I was in London. And for me, it was, so I was born in London, I grew up there, and it was a part of your mentality, as in, I remember also when I was growing up, there was a movie called License to Drive, and this kind of glorified the concept that as a young person growing up, you only truly achieve independence once you have a license to drive a car. And that's exactly how I felt when I was living in London, as in that mentality was exactly the case. You are only truly independent in a city like London if you have a car. And yet now, living in Berlin, which is, okay, given that it's half the size of London, but living in Berlin, just like yourself, I haven't owned a car now for over 10 years. And I feel so much more independent than when I ever had a car.
Yes, I think, and actually, let's say, I mean, there are many topics involving this situation, why people use car, why people love cars, why people want to have a car. So there is super subjective. But let's say about this topic that you bring about freedom. This is true because, for example, when I was doing this research in some cities, so one of the questionnaires to people was, why do you have a car? How do you feel about the car? And one of the most names word was freedom and comfort. But let's say that this freedom actually is, you think that is freedom, but then on the other hand, how do you feel when you are stuck in the middle of a traffic jam and you cannot do other things than wait and being there? I mean, and then this is not anymore freedom. So this freedom that, of course, advertisement and many other things just were used to sell a car back then and still are working, is a freedom that actually is not 100% freedom. And sometimes even in some cities, I mean, maybe not in Berlin because it's a big city, but in medium-sized cities, maybe sometimes it's more convenient and even quicker to take a bicycle or public transport than a car, because then if you think about the time that then takes you to find maybe a spot for parking, that's another situation. Then you cannot talk anymore about saving time or freedom. So it's a bit not always the case, this freedom thing, I would say. And then why people used to use the car. One of the disconnection with the cars can be also a status symbol that has happened, for example, in this city in Junín. It was really a thing. And also in my hometown, it's also a thing. Even when there are cities that are not big, the conditions are really great, the weather is good, you don't have a uphill situation, so you could completely walk, cycle, but people still want to have a car. Even I have to say, I grew up in a family where they are really fan of cars, and my father was taking me to school only for 5 blocks by car. So let's say that it's a mentality, and it's about culture, and it's not only, for example, taking me to school. Also during the weekends, people really use the cars. They will say, "Oh, free time. It's nice to walk, to take the bike." No, the opposite. People take the car, even in Junín, in this city. What was some habits that people had during the weekend? They were parking their car in the local park just to hang up there, just to look other people, look other cars, and that's all. So, so it was a kind of, how do you call it, car exhibition. I mean, if I show you the picture, you cannot believe it. It's full of car and people only staying there. I don't get what's the meaning of this, but for people there, especially in these medium small cities in Argentina, it's super important to have your own car. And the last model, I mean, and another thing that happened also, and it's a problem in these kind of cities when we talk about mobility, is people that they cannot afford a car just go for the motorcycle, because they also the last motorcycle, I mean, also teenagers is also really dangerous because it's also a thing. And also it's dangerous because many times, for example, parents taking kids to school, and there is kind of called the motobus, because many times there are 2 or 3 kids with the father in the same motorcycle, even not wearing helmets. So this is a completely super difficult situation. And the funny, I don't know if funny part, but the part that I cannot still understand, or I can a little bit, is that the public service of this bus system is for free for a student and for elderly people in Junin. But people, when doing these interviews, people didn't want to use, many of them, they didn't want to use it because they were thinking that this kind of way of moving around is for lower income people. So somehow, also this status symbol is really associated. So in a way, it's like the way people move around in the city, you can tell from which class they are coming from. So this is another important thing to change, to consider in people behaviors and mobility choices. It's not only about rational factors that they make people, when I am saying rational factor, I could say time and money, but it's also these other social norms, subjective factors that really influence in people mobility choices.
Yeah, when you were just talking there about Junin, and it reminded me of, I lived in a small city in the north of Italy called Parma, which has a population of 183,000. And they have no underground or tube system. They've got regional city and intercity transportation. But locally, they only have buses. There's nothing else. And so I also remember, just as you said, parents would drive their kids 50 meters with their huge SUVs, just to show everybody else, hey, look what I'm driving, basically. So, and as a cyclist, I remember almost being knocked over by such families because there was not a care of what else was going on the road around them. It was just simply, okay, the school is here. I normally park, boom, and I always found that to be so, inconsiderate, I think is the nicest way of putting it. But when you touch on this element of social status too, so if I have a car, then I'm a bit more perhaps bourgeoisie. And if I use public transport, I'm more sort of socialist stroke social democrat. Does that really still stand up? Because nowadays there are people who use, business people use public transport in the same way that they do in central London as well. As in, a lot of these people they work in the city. That I guess they earn quite a bit of money. It's not cheap anymore, is it? Either using public transport in a lot of cities, it's really expensive.
Let's say that in Argentina is that not the case. Actually, Argentina, I am not informed of all over the world, but if I compare with here in Berlin and many other cities in Europe, I think in Argentina it's extremely cheap to use the public transport, even when it's not for free, as in this case for a student. Even as a civilian, you can really travel really cheap. It's not expensive because it's also subsidized by the government. So I think it's also a different mentality. And if I compare here in Germany, for example, there are many people, it's the other way around. For them, status is, because also it's influenced by how you identify yourself. For example, if you're a person that you are conscious about the environment, you really want to take care of the environment. So for you, it's not this important to have the last car. It's completely the opposite. For you, status is being a person that really is sustainable in their mobility choices too, not only in just recycling, being conscious about energy and many other topics, but it's also about your mobility choices. And for you, that's important to use public transport, for example, or cycling. So this kind of status symbol can change in each context. And I would say not even in each country, but in each city. Because, for example, it's also about trends. Let's say I was doing back then reading this research about in Chile, I think in Latin America as well. There were these people that, the use of car was really growing, but at some point, like some kind of elite people, like upper class, starting to cycle and to show, like to have the last model of bicycles and to show to other people that was so cool. And then somehow that's just shifts to be a trend in the city. So if you were cycling, somehow your social status was higher than even having a class. So this can completely change completely change in each context. So, and it's evolving. Now, that's what I'm saying. Here we in Germany were like a step further than in Argentina, where for you status is having a car. Or even also, back then I was in Albania when I was studying, and also because of the communism topic back then, it was not allowed to have a car, right? When communism finished, then people, they really want to have a car because they couldn't have it back then. So for them, was really important, even though when we went there in, I think it was 2020, kids, you were asking a kid what they wanted to be when they were older, or what were their aspirations. All of them, they wanted to have a car for sure. And if you ask this question in cities like Berlin, you see younger generation, they don't really want to have a car. That's completely different mindset.
You and I are both people who are kind of conscious about the consequences of, I suppose, the mass ownership and perhaps overindulgent ownership of cars. There are some families that have a car for every member and perhaps even more. That's not normally the case, but that is quite common in some cases. But let's flip to the other side just to give it a bit of balance. So whenever I've spoken about this topic with people who live in Germany in more rural areas, especially former Eastern Germany, where a lot of the transportation lines were cut, the regional trains between cities, these networks, these routes were reduced heavily. They don't have as much access to public transportation. And people say there's only one bus an hour, or there's only one train an hour. And so therefore, and they run limited services. You can't get them at night and so on. So, if people live in villages where one village has a post office and the other village has a supermarket, and another village has a hospital and so on, you kind of have to have a car is what their argument was, because there is no other option. So this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier, because you said it's quite subjective and we have to take into consideration people's lifestyles and so on. But what can be said about these kinds of scenarios? Because it's easy to say, all right, the government needs to plan, or the local government needs to make better plans and so on. But when it comes to, and I know it's not really urban mobility, and perhaps the clue is in the name, this is kind of rural mobility. But there is, at some point, there's a crossing point. There's an exchange, as it were, or an interrelationship between the two, because people who live outside the city need to come into the city on occasion and so on. So how can you approach finding a balance between these different realities?
Yes, as I mentioned before, I mean, there are too many different situations why people use the cars and wants to have a car. And in this case, as you say, it's completely fair. I'm in the sense I cannot blame these people, for sure. I mean, if you have a van running every 1 hour, and even sometimes can be canceled. So, I imagine that in this case, you need this kind of freedom we were talking about before. I mean, you need something. And in this case, if there is not public transport system that is just fulfilling your needs, of course, people is going to have a car. And this is a kind of difficult topic, because many times the transport networks are planned, especially in the big city, but what about the suburban areas, as you say, rural areas? So this is a topic that lately is taken more into consideration, but for sure it needs to be really find solutions, I mean, in each context, because yes, there is not other solution than using the car in many of these situations, because also bikes cannot, even maybe you don't have paved streets. So how do you pretend people cycle? So for sure, this is a huge topic, and because when you consider a city and design a mobility plan for a city, you cannot forget about the surroundings, because even there are many people living in the surrounding. Let's give the example here. Berlin. So there are many people that live in Brandenburg and work in Berlin, or the other way around. For me, back then, I was also living here in Berlin and working in Brandenburg. Not Brandenburg City, I mean the surroundings. And for me, it was 1 hour train. And sometimes if this train was canceled, it was really difficult to come back home and go there on time. So I was thinking, I can understand why people sometimes decide to use the car. But yes, in this case, it's always if the government or the city doesn't give solutions, people is going to go to cars for sure. And then you have also this other kind of people that even when you have the option of a public transport, they are going to choose the car anyway. So you always have to consider this. But then in this case, you have to at least, I think a good approach is not just telling people, hey, you don't have to use the car. Not use it, because this is a not really proactive approach. Maybe what you have to show them is the benefits of not using the car, how sustainable it can be for your health, for many other situations. But this is only in the case that you have a plan B than the car. That's because in this case, as you mentioned, if there is not plan B, people is going to use the car for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we'll come later on to one of the solutions which we referred to. You wrote down as well before that we wanted to address. But before we get to that, there's another really interesting question with regards to coordination between government departments, and this is something which is not geographical, which is what we've just been talking about now, but actually this relates to the roles of different elements of urban governments and why they sometimes themselves represent problems when it comes to coming up with a more general or universal urban mobility plan.
Yes, and let's say from the Argentinian experience, back then I was working for the government. Well, as I mentioned before, in Argentina, back then there was not even an urban mobility department. And nowadays there is not even that in smaller cities. So for sure in Buenos Aires, now also Junín, and many other big cities, they have this department. But what happened, even when they have it, sometimes there is not overlapping between or working as a team between other departments. Can be, I don't know, urban planning, can be landscaping, can be infrastructure, can be engineering. I mean, can be many other topics that sometimes they don't work together, and this is a problem. And what happened also, if we continue talking about the governmental administration, if I say Argentina, what happened many times is that a new government comes and then the plans that they were supposed to happen are completely stopped. So it's starting over again. And this is a problem. We don't have long-term plans, safety, let's say. And that's why it's super difficult to move forward with completely sustainable urban mobility plans in Argentina. So yes, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think mostly from my side, my experience working for the government, that was the problem, and also the bureaucracy in between, because sometimes because even, I mean, when you try to work, and in my case, I was trying to work together with, I mean, it's super difficult to find the person you have to read to. So yes, it's difficult. So I think they should be like more not working in silos, but just working in some specific topics on teams. And yeah, let's say if you have to make a subway, for sure, you have to build infrastructure under the street, and for that you need information about pipelines. So you have to go to this department to talk about. So you cannot have a planning of a subway, for example, if you don't talk to this department. So for sure, this is also a difficult topic in I mean, from the Argentinian side. I'm not sure here, but
sure.
Okay, I haven't worked for the government here, but I think many times the lack of communication between different areas is an issue in many contexts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in the example that you noted down earlier, you also mentioned housing and land use as well. And obviously, housing is a very politicized topic as well in many countries, because nowadays there is a distinct lack of affordable housing in Berlin, it's also, you probably have experienced yourself, it's very hard to find a flat which is perhaps affordable for a lot of people, and it takes such a long time to find, and rents have gone up. They've doubled more or less in the last 10 or 15 years. So this is very hard for a lot of traditional, or I suppose natural or indigenous Berliners to be able to deal with all of these things. But then what you're talking about there was not just what happens between different governments, one comes in, then another one comes in, but you're also talking about this silo reality where you've got people within the same organization, as in the same kind of political party, the same regional government, and they still don't cooperate very well. And that's because they're all, I guess, protective of their budgets. They don't want to reveal too much. And then also with bureaucracy, obviously, the more bureaucracy there is, the longer it takes. So that makes it even more difficult for plans to actually be introduced quickly. It takes time.
Exactly, and can be the other way around too, because it can happen. Okay, I don't want to give so much information, but can happen to me. I was a bit frustrated being back there in Argentina when I was working for the government. So elections were coming, and for sure they wanted to make some, new projects. Like they wanted to show progress, and they wanted to start building the project right away to see, yes, hey, vote for me. I'm doing good things for the city. But even some of these projects, they were not in condition to start because they needed some more research. You can notice, for example, like it's not this, I don't want to, that's why I'm saying I don't want to give so much information, but like a small detail, for example, you cannot build a building if you don't have the structure, the calculation for the structure, But okay, yeah, let's start to build it anyway. So that's also a thing, because what happened? Then you have to take down and then make the calculation and build it again. So there's a lot of budgets going on in this direction. So it's not only bureaucracy, it's also these kind of games of power that are also involved. So yes, so it's a difficult game.
Yeah, I mean, famously Berlin, the airport topic with regards to Berlin, everybody makes a joke of it. And then there's also Stuttgart 21. I mean, it's 2026 and they're still building it. So there are a lot of examples within Germany as well, where there are these kinds of social mobility or transportation plans, but they still haven't really achieved the level of, I guess, efficiency which people would associate with these kinds of projects. So, okay, one last thing then, because as I said, we always want to talk also a little bit about solutions and something which you didn't quite get onto, but which I kind of had a feeling that was going to be the next step. So when we were talking about the differences between urban mobility and sort of a lack of mobility that exists in rural areas, one of the examples that you've given is building instead vast metropolises, but actually having better management and support for medium-sized cities. Do you feel that even within a country like Germany, that would be a better way of approaching mobility?
I mean, let's say that would be easier, as we say, if you are building a city from scratch, when you have a blank field and then you can start over again. So that would be easier, but in the case of here, Germany, so this, for example, here in Berlin is important, this initiative, like these changing cities initiatives that are more focused in kids, let's say neighborhoods. Why is it important to also create more where the cars are allowed, but as a guest is not, the main component of the street. So this is, I think, this kind of initiatives are really important. For example, what Carlos Moreno, I don't know if you have heard about him, this Colombian professor that has been working real close to Ana Hidalgo, the former mayor of Paris, that they have also, that's another good, just going back, this is also a good really example of European cities just really moving forward and making bold decisions with the mobility in Paris. So I think this, for example, this concept of the 15-minute city and 15 minutes neighborhood, let's say, is that just trying to create neighborhoods or cities where people don't really have the need to move far, and then everything is you can reach in 15 minutes by foot or by bicycle, and all your needs, your daily needs, groceries, health, sports, schools, are reachable in 15 minutes. So in this case, you can for sure reduce the amount of cars. Or we also have the example of Barcelona, and these city blocks. I don't know if you have heard about this, that all these blocks that is only pedestrian. It has been proved that the social engagement of people and the social interaction, it really improves because people goes there. When I have been there, I mean, I was there many years ago and recently was back, and it was amazing, like just to see all these people on the street chatting, elderly, kids. So that's what I'm talking about when I see it's not just, we are not talking only about doing better for the environment, about reducing the amount of cars and pollution. It's also about making people-centered cities, going back to that, and not city created around the car. Because for sure, when you create these cities and you give people the space, it's going to happen. So I think that is important. I got a bit lost. I don't know if I'm answering your question anymore.
No, no, absolutely. I mean, it's quite funny because I could overly politicize some of what you're saying, because there are certain groups within society which keep on talking about the face, as it were, of society and how it's changed, and they would like to go back to it. But that very same group of individuals don't want to have this very localized, as you said, Keats, which is like district or neighborhood mentality. They want to have their cars, they want to have their motorways. They don't actually want to do anything which would return neighborhoods to being neighborhoods. And yet they spend a lot of their time complaining about how neighborhoods have become this or that or the other. So I didn't really want to politicize it, and then I went ahead and I politicized it. So I do apologize. I don't want to be always such a social democrat stroke socialist in every point, but I think it's important what you say there, as in we have to really try to find a way of reconnecting with, I believe, nature on the one hand. I believe it was also Rotterdam in the Netherlands where they built this horrible motorway. I think it was in the 70s, and then a few years ago they decided, okay, we're going to get rid of this motorway, and now it's become like some kind of urban garden where people can go cycling there, go for nice walks. There's all sorts of plant life growing there, and it's become a natural habitat. I think it's Rotterdam. It could be somewhere else, but just to say that there are, as you said, from the decisions that were made in the 70s, and then people who have now begun to turn local urban environments into slightly more approachable natural areas, which is more people-centric and so on. This really is a positive focus. And unfortunately, there is still a lot of resistance to that, even though it has been, as you've just said, proven to actually make society or make communities, make neighborhoods more colorful, more also climate resistant, because by introducing trees it cools down the city as well, and it brings people together.
Exactly.
They're all pluses, right?
I mean, that's what I was saying before, that I guess also, of course, you are going to have a lot of resistance. First of all, because people are afraid of changes. When you tell this person, I'm sorry, you are not going to be allowed to park your car anyway here, or maybe it doesn't make sense you have a car anymore, this person is going to freak out and is going to say no. That's why I'm saying that as policymakers, people working in this field, people working in the government, you should have a different approach. You should just let them see themselves what are the benefits. Just show them, hey, wait, I am not saying that you don't use a car, but see, if you don't use it, you can see all the benefit you will have. Instead of that, you can just sit in this parking place. Now it's going to be an area for people to hang around. So if you really show these people, maybe they're going to buy it. And also another good approach is when you are doing pilot projects, as experiment. So you can, it's not only, first of all, you don't need a big investment, but also it's a good way to convince people, hey, this is not permanent, and then people more or less try to accept it. But then maybe it's permanent. That's what also happened, for example, during COVID, because also you have to take these opportunity windows. COVID was a great opportunity window for many cities around the world. What happened? People, public transport was not working. So many people had no other choice to cycle, for example. So many people discovered themselves that was a great way to move and navigate the city. And also many, for example, here in Berlin, there were built many pop-up lanes that they were meant to be temporary, but nowadays are permanent. So this was great, even though nowadays with the government, it's under discussion now, because many of these good plans, unfortunately, okay, I'm not going to politicize neither the topic here, but you have to really take advantage of these good situations.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm familiar with one or two of these pilot projects as well, and some of these sort of neighborhood projects, which also look to bring kids together, bring kids back out onto the streets so they can play in a safe way. And these are the kinds of initiatives which I hope will lead to more discussion, but respectful discussion, progressive discussion with regards to how we actually want to manage our cities in the future, and especially looking at the consequences of the Iran war and how petrol and fossil fuels have become more expensive. Looking at much more affordable and, should we say, fuel independent policy making with regards to introducing more renewable energies and renewable sustainable transportation methods. I think these are discussions that we really should have more. They already exist, but I think people should be able to engage more openly with them.
Yes, I completely agree, but I also have to add something, at least from my perspective, because nowadays many, government or cities are having or giving also the car lobby and car industry are just bringing these electric vehicles as the solution. And actually, it's not really the solution because, yes, for sure, maybe they pollute less. They're better for the environment. Okay, let me doubt about the way that the batteries are done, but let's say maybe are better for the environment. But you are here tackling only one topic, pollution. But you are not tackling any other topic that we were talking about earlier, the use of public space. The car is using a lot of public space, just leading people to have sedentary life because of car. Then car accident that, okay, maybe are going to happen less because cars are smarter, but even though they are going to happen. So this is not the solution. I think the solution is also more about a mindset, political will, and change of behavior. So this is, I think, from my perspective, of course, it's not easy, but I think it's much more than that, the solution, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you as well for making that point, because it's not simply a question of moving, as you say, to electric vehicles. There's a more fundamental issue that needs to be approached. And as you say, these roads are public spaces and we need to use them a lot better than we are doing. Valeria, thank you very much. Interesting introduction into the topic of urban mobility. We kind of avoided going into some of the more detailed discussions which you alluded to in your thesis. So maybe at a future point we can go into one or two of these detailed points as well, and then people can perhaps consider some of the issues that you talk about there. But thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Yes, it was quite interesting, and I'm super happy we finally made this talk. And yes, for sure we can make a further conversation, because when it comes about sustainable mobility, I can talk for hours. So yes, so thanks a lot for your time too.